In a time when the Arab world lived in peace and security under the Ottoman Empire, Europe was drowning in wars and bloodshed. Jerusalem stood as a spiritual heart, protected and calm within the empire's vast lands. But as the French Revolution came to an end, a new figure rose, Napoleon Bonaparte. Driven by his imperial ambition, he marched to Egypt and from there advanced towards Acre. For 2 months, his cannons roared against the city's walls, yet Acre stood firm. Defeated, Napoleon issued a proclamation calling on the Jews of the world to settle in Palestine. It was the first official call for Jewish migration to the Holy Land. But his words found no echo. The Ottoman Empire was still strong. In 1891, the Jewish thinker Ahad Ha'am visited Palestine. He wrote, "They speak of the land as if it were empty, but in reality, it is already filled with another people." Or, as he famously described it, "Palestine is beautiful, but she is married." Decades later, British interest grew. In 1840, Lord Palmerston, the British Foreign Secretary, wrote to his ambassador in Istanbul,
"To His Excellency, Her Majesty's Ambassador in Istanbul, convinced the Sultan to allow Jewish settlement in Palestine."
Money from wealthy families like Rothschild soon followed. But Sultan Abdulhamid II answered with his famous words,
"I will not sell even 1 inch of Palestine. It is not mine, it belongs to the Muslim nation. My people watered it with their blood."
Before the first Zionist wave of immigration in 1882, Palestine's population was overwhelmingly Arab. Fewer than 25,000 Jews lived in the land, most of them part of the old communities in Jerusalem, Hebron, Safed, and Tiberias. In contrast, there were nearly 450,000 Muslims and around 60,000 Christians. Jews made up less than 5% of the total population. By the late 19th century, the Zionist movement was born in Europe. Jewish settlers began arriving in waves, establishing farming colonies in Palestine under Ottoman rule. Though small at first, their presence would shape the future. Then came the Great War. Britain promised the Arabs independence if they rose against the Ottomans.
To His Majesty's government, we promise the Arabs their freedom if they support us against the Ottomans.
At the same time, it secretly divided the region with France in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And in 1917, Britain issued the infamous Balfour Declaration, a pledge to create a national home for the Jews in Palestine. 3 promises and 3 betrayals. Under the British mandate, Jewish migration accelerated. Palestinians resisted, rising in revolt, but their cries were ignored. Zionist militias launched terrorist attacks, even against the British themselves. In 1946, the bombing of the King David Hotel shook Jerusalem. A large, crowded ship, the Exodus, sailing across the Mediterranean, filled with Jewish migrants, waving and holding banners. British Navy ships surrounded, blocking its path to Palestine. The Zionist underground made a shocking decision. They planted explosives on the ship Patria, carrying over 1,800 Jewish refugees, killing more than 250 Jewish immigrants. Yet about 1,500 survivors were permitted to stay. In the Zionist mentality, the end justifies the means. By 1947, the British, exhausted and bloodied, abandoned Palestine, leaving all their weapons behind for the Jews and the Zionists. In May 1948, Jewish leaders in Tel Aviv declared the State of Israel. Arab armies from Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq entered the war. Yet the heavily armed Zionist militias prevailed. Hundreds of villages were destroyed, and more than 750,000 Palestinians were forced to flee their homes. The Nakba, the Great Catastrophe. In 1967, Israel struck again, seizing Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. The Holy City fell under occupation, and another wave of Palestinians were forced to flee. The Nakba, the setback, had begun. Years of wars followed: the War of Attrition, the October War of 1973, the invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Yet the Palestinian spirit did not break. In 1987, the Intifada erupted, a popular uprising of stones against tanks. And in 2000, the Second Intifada set the land ablaze once more. After the 2006 elections, where Hamas won a democratic majority, Israel and the West imposed a crippling blockade on Gaza. Electricity, medicine, freedom of movement, all strangled. Yet Gaza endured. 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, and after all this injustice came October 7th, 2023.
No women, no children, no civilians. Our fight is with the soldiers of the occupation.
In the early hours of dawn, a highly coordinated military operation, codenamed the Green Flood, was launched by the leadership of the Green Fighters, with clear objectives: to capture soldiers from the Blue Entity and reignite long-stalled negotiations over the suffocating blockade imposed on the largest open-air prison in the world and the years of escalating repression. Fighters stationed across the prison's borders received direct and explicit orders: avoid harm to civilians, women, or children. Shortly after, multiple points along the fortified barrier were breached with minimal resistance. Thousands of Green Fighters surged across in a perfectly synchronized assault involving drone strikes, paragliders, and a massive barrage of over 4,000 rockets targeting military infrastructure of the Blue Entity. Watchtowers, cameras, and communication systems were systematically neutralized to blind the early warning network. The operation's blueprint centered on striking military outposts around the prison's perimeter, often referred to as the Blue Envelope, but the unexpected absence of resistance emboldened many to push further into Blue-controlled territory. Entire bases collapsed. Some were seized by force, others surrendered. By late morning, hundreds of Green Fighters returned through the breach, escorting captured Blue soldiers, mostly from overrun military facilities. Amid the chaos, thousands of unarmed civilians from the prison crossed the border as well, not part of the original operation.
This is our occupied land.
At the same time, a music festival was taking place in the vicinity.
We've got movement near the border. This looks like an infiltration.
Clear the area! Hit them now!
Oh my God, that was the festival. They're holding hostages in those trucks.
Strike them. The hostages don't matter. We can't let them reach.
According to released field reports, the Green Fighters were unaware of the gathering or its nature. As sirens blared and rockets flew overhead, festival goers ran in panic, triggering chaos and confusion. In the fog of war, no clear separation existed between military personnel and civilians. As Blue forces began to mobilize, they opened fire on anything that moved, launching indiscriminate strikes across the breached zones. Many civilians were killed, caught in the chaos. Some by misidentification, others by sheer disregard.
Confirm strike.
There are hostages, Israel.
You have your orders.
Some reports even suggest that the Blue Entity's own airstrikes may have killed many of its own citizens, including those at the music festival. In a state of panic, it bombed homes, villages, and people without distinction. Whether by design or confusion, the result was the same: chaos, fire, and death. What followed gave the Blue Entity the green light to do as it pleased. The Blue Entity began massing ground forces along the border with what they call the prison, and launched a brutal assault across the entire city. Schools were targeted, hospitals were bombed, mosques and churches alike were reduced to rubble.
There's a tunnel underneath the hospital. Strike it now.
Following the crimes against civilians, a global wave of outrage erupted, sparked by the bombing of hospitals and the deliberate cutting of electricity and water supplies to patients.
Les informations sont très graves.
Under international pressure, the government attempted to justify the massacre.
This was a rocket. This is a military plan.
Their spokesperson appeared before the world, pointing to a random pipe, claiming it was a rocket, and to a wall calendar, insisting it was a military plane. But when their ground forces entered what they called the prison, they were met with fierce resistance from the defenders of the Green Zone.
We will be free. Our green prison will resist. We will come to you from beneath the earth and from everywhere.
We burn the ground, we bomb everything, but they come out of the sand. They kill us and disappear. I'm not going back in. They're ghosts.
Ambushes were set, soldiers were lost, and yet the Blue Army could not decipher their enemy's strategy. On the 49th day of the war, after more than 5,000 Palestinians had been killed, including over 1,000 children and countless wounded and displaced, both sides agreed to a limited prisoner exchange. The first batch released female detainees from both sides. From the blue jails came women who had been held for 13 to 15 years, surviving in harsh conditions, torture, skin burns, psychological trauma. On the other hand, the women held by the Green soldiers returned in good health, smiling and expressing gratitude for the protection they received from air assaults. After destroying hospitals, their next target became the press. The voices telling the truth. One journalist, who had already lost his entire family, was live on air when a colleague handed him the phone. On the other end, the devastating news. His whole family had been killed. Another man, a cameraman, was also targeted. And so it continued. To this day, more than 500 journalists have been killed, deliberately targeted by the Blue Entity for doing their job. And while we were working on preparing this very video, we received the news of the martyrdom of two more journalists, Anas al-Sharif and Mohammed Kreika.
And after the Zionist entity failed to achieve its goals, it turned to the killing of more than 60,000 civilians, a genocide against an entire people. They launched a war of starvation, blocking food from reaching the population of what is described as the world's largest open-air prison. Today, the world is rising against oppression, exposing the hypocrisy of global powers. World leaders unite in outrage over the killing of 7 French journalists, yet remain silent over the killing of 300 Palestinian journalists, 60,000 civilians, and 20,000 children, even aiding in their extermination. Are Arab lives so cheap, while the French lives are priceless? The question remains, how deep is the double standard of this corrupt